somewhere beneath the difficulty, there is a question most people never say out loud. Why is this happening to me? Is this what I deserve? Did I bring this on myself? Those questions feel like self-reflection, but they are something else. They are the sound of a mind that has been taught, without knowing it, that pain is a punishment. That suffering means something is wrong with you, that the life you are living is the life you have earned. That belief, carried quietly and without question for years, creates far more suffering than the difficulty itself ever could. Most people understand karma this way, as a kind of ledger. Good deeds credited, past mistakes charged back, the balance settled in pain. So when something goes wrong, the mind does not just carry the loss, it carries the verdict too. And that verdict is heavy in a way that most of us have stopped noticing. Buddhism does not teach this. What the Buddha taught about karma is more precise, more honest, and in a quiet way, more freeing than any version of cosmic punishment or reward. Karma is not what happens to you. Karma is what the mind does in the moment it meets what happens. When you understand that, not as a theory, but as something felt in your own experience, you stop being someone karma is happening to. You become the mind that shapes what happens next. These teachings show you exactly how. And once you see it, you will not be able to unsee it. The Buddha himself did not begin with a definition. He began with a question that any child could answer. Picture a morning gathering. The monks have assembled. The air is cool and unhurried. The Buddha looks out at the faces before him and asks something simple, something any child could answer. He says, if you took a fistful of salt and dissolved it in a small cup of water, would that water be drinkable? No, the monks said. It would be far too bitter. Then the Buddha asked, what if you took that same fistful of salt, identical in amount, completely unchanged, and dissolved it in the river Ganges? Would the Ganges become too salty to drink? No, the river is too vast. One handful of salt disappears into it entirely. You would not taste it at all. The Buddha was quiet for a moment. Then he said, this is how karma works. Same salt, same past action, but what happens next depends entirely on what receives it. A small cup, a mind that is tight and reactive, pulled around by whatever arrives, that mind feels the full weight of an old action. It overwhelms everything. A mind that has been widened through practice receives the same past action differently. Not because the past changed. The salt is still there, but the container has grown large enough that it no longer poisons what is present. This teaching is preserved in one of the earliest collections of the Buddha's words. He used it to answer a question most struggling people carry quietly inside. Are my past actions a sentence on my present life? His answer was precise. Not if the container grows, Most teachings about karma leave the past exactly where it is, heavy, fixed, working itself out over time. This teaching says something different. The container matters as much as what it holds. That changes everything. And the container, the quality, the clarity, the breadth of the mind, is the one thing in this equation you can actually work with. Before that work can begin, 3 versions of karma need to be set down. Most people carry at least one of them without knowing it. All 3 share the same problem. They take the container out of your hands entirely. The first is karma as punishment. When something painful arrives, a loss, an illness, a failure, a door that will not open, this version says, you earned it. Difficulty is debt being collected. Suffering is a sentence being served. This version is everywhere. You hear it when someone gets bad news and another person says quietly, karma. You feel it at 2 in the morning when something goes wrong and the mind asks, what did I do to deserve this? It runs through the way people talk about misfortune, always searching for the moral cause underneath, always assuming that if something painful happened, something wrong must have preceded it. The damage this causes is not mainly guilt. The damage is passivity. If difficulty is punishment, then the only thing to do is endure. Wait for the sentence to finish, or perform enough visible good acts to tip the balance. The mind has nothing real to do in this model. It just receives what it has earned and waits for something outside to change. Agency goes. Practice becomes transaction. The path becomes debt management. And worst of all, the person starts to feel that their suffering is proof that something is fundamentally wrong with them. Not just unlucky, deserving. That verdict shapes everything. The way you expect things to go. The quiet assumption that if something good arrives, it will probably be taken away. The sense that improvement is not really for people like you. The Buddha did not teach this. A verdict comes from outside and lands on you. A condition grows from inside. And a condition, unlike a verdict, can be understood, worked with, and changed. The second version is karma as fixed fate. The patterns that keep repeating, the same kinds of difficulty arriving in the same shape, the relationships that seem to follow a script. This version says, it is already written. Nothing can alter it. This version sounds wise sometimes. It sounds like acceptance, like not fighting what cannot be changed. And it is pointing at something real. Resisting what is already here does create more suffering than the situation itself. That part is true. But accepting what is present right now is completely different from believing nothing can ever be otherwise. Those are not the same thing. The Salt teaching answers this directly. If karma were fate, if past actions produced fixed results no matter what, then the same fistful of salt would always have the same outcome. It does not. The outcome depends on the container. The container is not fixed. What past actions create is a tendency, a weight in a particular direction, a slope that makes certain movements easier, not a rail that can only go one way. What happened yesterday shapes today. It does not determine it. The difference between shaped and determined is the difference between feeling trapped by your own history and seeing that this moment, right now, is genuinely open. The third version is karma as a moral bank account. Good actions go in as credit. Harmful ones draw the balance down. Somewhere a ledger is being kept. When enough good accumulates, better circumstances follow. This version at least gives you something to do. You can make deposits. You can choose. That feels like agency. But the flaw is still there, just wearing smarter clothes. The result still depends on something outside the mind, an accounting process running on its own timeline, settling its own balance. You provide the actions. The outcome is handled elsewhere. Two people can give to the same cause. One gives and lets it go. The other gives and quietly tracks whether the universe has noticed. The visible action is identical. What the mind is doing is not. The bank account version cannot see that difference. It is only looking at the deed. So practice becomes investment. Do good now, wait for returns later. Attention goes to the visible deed, the generous act, the right behavior, and away from the one place the Buddha always pointed, the quality of the mind in the moment the action is taken. All three versions place the mechanism of karma somewhere out of reach, in a judge, in a script, in a ledger. And when the mechanism is out of reach, the honest answer to what you can actually do is not much. The Buddha's teaching does not accept that answer. In one of the earliest collections of his teachings, the Buddha said, "Intention, I tell you, is karma." Intending, one does karma by way of body, speech, and mind. Intention is karma. Not the visible action, not the outcome, not what arrives weeks or years later. The intention, the quality of mind in the moment something is done, that is where karma is made. And intention here is not just the conscious decision to act. It is the whole quality of the mind in that moment. When you do something from genuine care, that quality is one thing. When you do the exact same thing from fear of being judged, from needing to control what happens, from wanting to be seen well, the quality is something else entirely. The behavior looks the same to anyone watching. The karma being created is not. Think of a simple moment. Someone asks for your help with something inconvenient and you say yes. If that yes comes from genuine willingness, the karma is one thing. If the same yes comes from fear of being seen as unhelpful, from resentment being swallowed rather than resolved, the karma is something different. The action is identical. What the mind is doing is not. This also settles something the punishment model gets wrong. It assumes every difficult result traces back to a proportional moral cause. But in the Buddha's teaching, karma and its result are two separate things. Karma is the action planted. The result is what ripens from it. They are connected, but not in a straight line. A person can act from genuine care and still face a hard outcome. A person can act from fear and have things go smoothly for a while. The connection is real. It is just not the simple matching game the punishment version assumes. And what ripens depends not only on the action planted, but on the mind that receives it. Karma is not a transaction between your past self and your future circumstances. Karma is what the mind is doing right now, in this moment, meeting this experience. The past is fixed. The future is not here yet. This moment is the only one that is actually workable. One final distinction completes the picture: wholesome karma and unwholesome karma. Most people assume wholesome karma means action that produces good outcomes, that if life is going well, what you are doing must be wholesome. That is still the bank account version dressed up differently. It is not what the teaching means. Wholesome and unwholesome karma are not defined by results. They are defined by roots. Wholesome karma has 3 roots: acting without grasping at a particular outcome, bringing genuine goodwill to what you are doing, not performing goodwill, actually feeling it, and seeing clearly what is actually present rather than what old habit or fear says is there. Action that comes from those 3 roots is wholesome, not because pleasant circumstances follow, but because the mind doing the acting is oriented toward honesty, care, and clear seeing. Unwholesome karma has 3 roots that are the mirror of those: craving, the reaching for things to be different from how they are, the grasping at control, at certainty, at being approved of, that low-level hunger that runs beneath most ordinary days. Aversion, the pushing away, the background resistance, the irritation that arrives when experience does not match what the mind wants. And confusion, seeing things wrong, taking what is impermanent for something solid, running on old patterns instead of seeing what is actually here. Action that comes from those 3 roots is unwholesome, not because things go badly, but because the mind doing the acting is not seeing straight. What this means in practice is something most people have never been told. You can be in genuine pain and still be creating wholesome karma. If your response to difficulty comes from steadiness rather than reactivity, from honest seeing rather than confusion, from care for yourself and others rather than grasping at a particular outcome, that is wholesome karma. It does not require circumstances to improve. It does not require life to get easier. It requires the mind to be working honestly. This is the teaching that changes the relationship to difficulty entirely. It means no situation is karmically wasted. A person sitting with illness, with grief, with a failed relationship, if the mind in that situation is working honestly, wholesome karma is being created right now, in that difficulty, not despite it. And equally, a life that looks smooth from the outside can be generating unwholesome karma steadily, through subtle grasping, through background aversion, through the confusion that mistakes a comfortable arrangement for something real. The roots, not the results, are what the teaching is pointing at. Now put this together. Karma is not what happens to you. It is not a sentence handed down from outside. It is not a fixed script. It is not a ledger being settled somewhere you cannot see. Karma is intentional action, And the quality of that action is determined entirely by what the mind is rooted in at the moment it meets experience. Whether what is present in that moment is clarity or confusion, genuine care or grasping, honest seeing or the distortions that habit and fear produce. Which means this: the present moment is always a point of genuine agency. The salt from the past is real. It does not need to be pretended away. But the container, the mind receiving it, is something you can work with right now in a life that has real difficulty in it. The person who understands this stops waiting for karma to improve. They stop performing good actions, hoping to tip a balance they cannot see. They start paying attention to what their actions are actually rooted in, because the mind is where the whole process begins, and the mind is where it can genuinely change. Most people spend years trying to arrange circumstances so the mind can finally be at ease. This teaching points in the opposite direction. Train the mind first. The circumstances are not the problem. What makes that possible is seeing clearly what those roots are. Not in theory, not only in dramatic moments of crisis, but in the small, ordinary moments of an ordinary day, the friction when plans change, the quiet hunger for things to be different, the confusion that shapes behavior without announcing itself. Most people move through these moments too quickly to see what is actually happening in them. The thought that reaches automatically for reassurance, the flicker of resistance when something does not go as expected, the assumption so old it feels like fact. These are the roots. Seeing them clearly is the beginning of changing them. And that is exactly where the next teaching begins. The roots do not always look the way you expect them to. Sometimes the person most visibly caught in them is also the person who appears, from the outside, to be doing everything right. Nanda was that person. He was considered the most handsome man in the kingdom. His wedding was days away. The woman he was to marry, Janapada Kalyani, was said to be the most beautiful woman in the entire Sakya clan. And on a morning that should have been ordinary, everything changed. The Buddha arrived at Nanda's house while he was still preparing to leave. As the Buddha rose to go, he handed Nanda his begging bowl and walked out the door without taking it back. Nanda followed, because how could he not? He carried the bowl outside, glancing back toward where Janapada Kalyani stood watching him go. He fully expected to return the bowl and be back with her within minutes. He did not go back. By the end of that morning, through a sequence of events that moved faster than he could process, Nanda found himself ordained as a monk. No war, no crisis, no dramatic conversion, just the quiet force of circumstance and a mind that could not find the words to say, "I need to go back." For months after, Nanda practiced alongside the other monks. He sat with them, he walked with them, he followed every form, and his mind was somewhere else entirely. Not from laziness. His attention kept returning to Janapada Kalyani, the image of her face, the life he had been about to start, the morning he had not come back from. The other monks noticed. His body was present, his mind was not. And what the story shows, this invisible current running beneath everything visible, is not a character flaw in Nanda. It is a description of how the mind works in all of us, almost all of the time. That current has a name in the Buddha's teaching: craving. And Nanda's story is not actually about Nanda. It is about the invisible forces that drive the mind when it is not being examined. The Buddha identified 3 of these forces as the roots of all unwholesome karma. They are not personality types. They are not moral failures. They are movements of mind, common to everyone, present in every life, running beneath behavior without announcing themselves. And because they run quietly, most people never see them. They just feel the effects. The craving that keeps someone in an unfulfilling situation because the alternative is unknown. The aversion that makes someone short with people they love when nothing is obviously wrong. The confusion that leads someone to keep making the same decision in different circumstances, never quite seeing the pattern. These are not dramatic examples. They are Tuesday afternoon. The first root is craving. Most people hear that word and picture something obvious: the desire for money, for food, for physical pleasure. But craving in the Buddha's teaching is far more pervasive than that. It is the basic movement of wanting things to be different from how they are. And it shows up constantly, in forms so ordinary you stop noticing them. The mild impatience when a page loads slowly, the way the mind rehearses an argument before it happens, the checking of a phone not for information but for reassurance, the low-level hunger for certainty about how something will turn out, the monitoring of whether you are being seen correctly, the quiet grasping at approval that shapes what you say and how you say it. It also runs through the way we want to be seen, the careful editing of what we say so a particular impression is made, the need to be understood in a specific way by a specific person, the monitoring of how a conversation is landing. All of that is craving, not for objects, but for a particular version of reality, one in which you are thought of correctly, one in which the future is taking the shape you want. The grasping is at outcomes, at certainty, at control. Most of the suffering that capable, intelligent people carry is not caused by dramatic events. It is caused by this, the quiet, persistent reaching for a version of reality that matches what the mind wants. The gap between what is and what is wanted is where craving lives, and it is almost always there. None of those feel like craving in the dramatic sense, but they all share the same structure, the mind reaching for something it does not currently have, things as they are, not being enough. Craving also has a particular relationship with time. It is almost always pulling away from the present, towards something in the future that would finally make things right, or back towards something in the past that needs to be recovered. The present moment, as it is rarely enough for a mind running on craving. There is always somewhere else it would rather be. And because craving keeps the mind in another time, it makes wholesome karma very difficult to create. Wholesome karma is created right here, in this moment, from what is actually present. A mind that is always somewhere else is not available for that. Nanda was not a greedy person. But the mind that kept returning to Janapada Kalyani while his body sat in meditation, that was craving. The mind had something it wanted. It could not let it go. And because the craving was not examined, it shaped everything. Every hour of practice, every conversation, the quality of every day. Craving does not always feel unpleasant. Sometimes it feels like motivation. Sometimes it feels like love. Sometimes it feels like reasonable planning. The question the Buddha's teaching asks is not whether the desire feels pleasant. The question is the mind grasping? Is it reaching towards something with a quality of need? And if it is, craving is present, quietly shaping the action, quietly shaping the karma. The second root is aversion. Most people hear this and picture obvious anger, the outburst, the moment someone loses control. But aversion in the Buddha's teaching is much wider than that. It is the basic movement of not wanting something that is present. And it runs through ordinary days in forms just as quiet as craving. The slight stiffening when someone says something you disagree with. The dulling of attention when a task feels tedious. The edge in your voice when things are not moving fast enough. The internal withdrawal when a conversation goes somewhere uncomfortable. The background discomfort with uncertainty that makes decisions rushed. None of that is what most people call anger. But it is all aversion. The mind pushing away from something it does not want. There is also a subtler form. It is the aversion to not knowing, to uncertainty, to situations that have not resolved yet. The mind that cannot tolerate ambiguity will move toward a decision, any decision, just to end the uncomfortable feeling of not knowing. That rushing is aversion. The action it produces is karma, and it is often the karma the person is least aware of because it feels like decisiveness rather than avoidance. Aversion creates its own particular quality of karma. Actions that come from aversion tend to be contracted. They are shaped by what the mind is trying to avoid, rather than by what the mind genuinely wants. A conversation had from aversion, from the desire to end something uncomfortable, to get out of a situation, carries a different quality than the same conversation had from genuine engagement. The words might be similar. The karma is not. Aversion also accumulates. Small irritations, not noticed and not addressed, become background states. The person who is mildly annoyed by everything but says nothing about any of it, that accumulation shapes behavior in ways the person does not see. Sharpness in their tone, a slight brittleness in response to pressure, the sense other people sometimes have that they are walking on something unstable. All of it traceable, if you look carefully enough, to aversion that was never examined. The third root is confusion. Of the three, this is the deepest, and it is the most difficult to see because it is the lens through which everything else is seen. Confusion here does not mean being unclear about facts. It means seeing the nature of experience wrong. Taking what is temporary as if it were permanent. Taking patterns of habit as if they were fixed reality. Taking what is happening right now as if it were the same as what happened before. Acting from a map of the world that was drawn years ago and has not been updated since. This is why confusion is considered the deepest root. Craving and aversion can sometimes be felt. There is a quality of wanting or pushing that the body registers, however faintly. Confusion has no such signal. It is invisible precisely because it operates as the way you see, not as something you see. You do not notice the lens. You just see through it. Most people operate this way most of the time. They are not stupid. They are busy. And the mind in motion does not stop to ask, is this actually what is happening? Or is this what I expect to happen based on everything that happened before? It just responds. From the pattern, from the habit, from the assumption so old it no longer feels like an assumption. Think of a relationship where one person has a long history of not being heard. Their partner says something neutral, a simple comment, nothing critical, but the mind reads it as dismissal. It responds from a wound that was not caused by this person in this moment. The response is real. The reading is wrong. That gap between what is actually happening and what the mind believes is happening is confusion. And the karma created in that moment comes not from what the partner said, but from the distorted lens through which it was received. Confusion is also the root that makes the other two harder to see. When the lens is wrong, craving looks like love. Aversion looks like good judgment. The habits that are running the show feel like free decisions. The roots stay hidden, and because they stay hidden, they keep shaping karma without being touched. These three, craving, aversion, and confusion, are the roots of all unwholesome karma. Every action that creates suffering, in yourself or in others, traces back to one or more of these three. And their opposite three are the roots of all wholesome karma. Where craving reaches and grasps, non-craving acts without needing a particular outcome. The action is taken because it is the right thing to do in this moment. Not because a specific result is being secured. Not because the future is being arranged. Because this, right here, is what care looks like. Non-craving does not mean not caring about outcomes. It means caring without gripping. Doing the work fully, wanting things to go well, and then being able to release the result. That release is not indifference. It is the mind that can act wholeheartedly without making its peace contingent on how things turn out. Where aversion pushes away, non-aversion meets what arrives with goodwill. Not forced positivity. Not pretending difficulty is not difficult, but the genuine orientation of a mind that is not contracted against what is present, open to it, willing to be with it. Non-aversion does not mean never feeling resistance. It means the resistance is not running the show. You can notice something is unpleasant and still remain present with it. You can disagree and still stay open. That quality of non-withdrawal, even in difficulty, is what the Buddha's teaching calls goodwill toward experience. Where confusion sees wrong, clear seeing sees accurately. What is impermanent is seen as impermanent. What is happening now is seen as what is happening now, not as a repetition of what happened before. The map is updated. The response comes from what is actually present. Clear seeing is also what allows the other two wholesome roots to function. When you see accurately, you naturally let go of what cannot be held. When you see accurately, there is less to push against. Remove the confusion, and the other two roots begin to thin. These three wholesome roots are not a personality type you either have or do not have. They are qualities that can be developed, moment by moment, in ordinary situations, in the friction of an average day. Now here is what matters most about all of this. These roots are not a moral framework. They are a description of how the mind actually works. Craving is not a sin. Aversion is not a character defect. Confusion is not stupidity. They are movements, like weather, like gravity, operating in the mind, whether or not anyone labels them. Every person has all three. Every life has all three. The question is only whether they are being seen. Most people also have one root that runs more persistently than the others. A mind living primarily with craving, always reaching, always a step ahead of where it is. A mind living primarily with aversion, quietly but constantly pushing back against what arrives. A mind living primarily with confusion, habitually running on old patterns without checking whether they still apply. Recognizing which root pulls hardest in your own experience is one of the most useful things the teaching offers. Because the root you know is the root you can work with. And this is the shift that changes everything. Nanda could not transform his practice until he could see what was actually driving it. He could sit perfectly still and generate unwholesome karma because the root was invisible. Once it became visible, once he could name what was pulling at him and examine it rather than just be pulled, something could change. That same sequence is available to anyone. It does not require a monastery. It does not require years of practice before it becomes useful. It requires one thing, the willingness to look at what is actually happening in the mind before acting. To pause before the irritated reply and ask, what is this aversion? What is it not wanting? To notice the hunger for reassurance before reaching for the phone and ask, what is this craving reaching for? To catch the moment of a familiar reaction and ask, am I seeing this clearly? Or am I seeing it through something older? Most people discover, when they try this, that the window is short. The root moves fast. The gap between stimulus and automatic response is very small. This is not a failure. This is the baseline. The practice is simply to make that gap slightly larger over time. Not through effort exactly, through familiarity, through knowing what you are looking for well enough to catch it a moment sooner each time. The aim is not to catch it every time. The practice is to catch it sometimes, and then a little more often, and then enough that what happens after the catching starts to change. That noticing, just the noticing, is the beginning of wholesome karma. Because in the moment you see a root clearly, its grip loosens. Not because you have fixed it, because awareness and automaticity cannot fully occupy the same space at the same time. The first few times you catch a root in action, it can feel uncomfortable. You see the craving in something you thought was care. You see the aversion in something you thought was good judgment. You see the confusion in something you thought was accurate perception. This is not a reason to stop looking. This is what the looking is for. The discomfort is not a problem. It is the feeling of the lens being cleaned. Wholesome karma does not require the 3 unwholesome roots to be permanently gone before it can grow. It requires only that they begin to be seen. The practice is not becoming someone who never experiences craving or aversion or confusion. The practice is becoming someone who notices them arriving. That difference between being driven and being aware is the entire territory. And the territory is larger than most people imagine when they first encounter this teaching. Once you begin to see the roots, you start to see them not just in the moments of obvious difficulty, but in the texture of ordinary time, in the quality of attention you bring to a meal, in the way you listen when someone is speaking, in the small choices that seem too minor to examine. The roots are there too, and so is the possibility of wholesome karma. This is what makes the 3 roots genuinely useful rather than merely interesting. They are not a framework for judging yourself. They are a map. And a map is useful not when you study it at a desk, but when you use it to navigate. Seeing those roots is the only way to work with them. And that seeing does not happen in theory. It happens in the ordinary moments of an ordinary day, in the friction when plans change, in the quiet hunger for reassurance, in the reaction so fast it was over before you noticed it had started. You are probably not in Nanda's exact situation, but the mind you are working with is the same kind of mind. It has the same roots. It runs the same hidden currents. And in every ordinary moment, in the gap between what arrives and what the mind does next, those roots are either running the show or they are being seen. There is a story from the last day of the Buddha's life that shows what karma looks like when the wholesome roots are fully running. Kunda was a blacksmith who lived in the town of Parva. He had heard that the Buddha was traveling through the region with a group of monks, and he made the journey to ask if they would accept a meal from him. He was a craftsman who had listened to the teachings and felt something shift in the way he understood his own life. The request to offer a meal was not an obligation he felt. It was something he wanted to do. The Buddha agreed to come. Kunda prepared through the morning with care. He used what he had. He thought about what would nourish the monks after their walking. He thought about how the meal should be set out and what it would mean to receive these people in his home. None of this preparation was anxious. It was attentive. There is a difference between those 2 things, and the difference is audible in how the morning is remembered. When the monks arrived, Kunda served them. The Buddha ate a particular dish that Kunda had prepared, and then quietly asked that the remainder of that dish be buried rather than offered to the others. It was an unusual request. Kunda followed it without fully understanding why. The meal ended. The monks left. Kunda watched them go. By the following day, the Buddha was gravely ill. He continued walking, several miles through heat, until he reached a grove of sal trees near the town of Kusinara. He lay down between 2 of the trees. He called his attendants. He gave his final teachings. He did not rise again. The community that had formed around him over 45 years now had to carry forward what he had given them, without him. A shadow gathered around Kunda's name, not through open accusation, but in the way that grief moves through a community that has just lost something it cannot replace. People began connecting what they had been fed to what had followed. Whatever Kunda had intended, the result was visible to everyone. Kunda was not a man who could hold this lightly. He had prepared with his full attention. He had given from genuine respect and care. There had been nothing in him that morning except the honest wish to serve well. And he now carried the possibility that his service had caused the death of the person he most wanted to honor. Before he died, the Buddha gave specific instructions about Kunda. He told Ananda, one of his closest attendants, to travel to the blacksmith and deliver a message. Not consolation in general terms. A specific teaching about what the karma of the meal actually was and why. The message was this: Kunda should feel no remorse. The karma of his offering was equal, in its wholesome quality, to the karma of the meal that Sujata had offered on the morning of the Buddha's enlightenment. The last nourishment given before sitting beneath the Bodhi tree and waking fully to the nature of things. 2 offerings, decades apart. One to a man about to discover the end of suffering. One to that same man as he moved beyond it entirely. Equally wholesome karma. The comparison the Buddha made was not random. Sujata's offering came at the moment of greatest threshold, the point at which an ordinary man was about to become something the tradition had never seen before. The Buddha used that specific meal as the benchmark for maximum wholesome karma. And then he said that Kunda's meal, the one that preceded his death, met that same benchmark. Not because Kunda was exceptional, because what he brought to the morning was complete. Nothing left out. Nothing held back from genuine care. Nothing divided between what he offered and what he hoped to get in return. Not because the outcomes matched. The outcomes could not have been more different. What made the offerings equal had nothing to do with what followed either of them. It had everything to do with what Kunda brought to that morning. The care that was real, the respect that was not performed, the wish that held nothing concealed in it. Nothing that happened after the meal could revise what the karma already was. The karma was complete the moment the bowl was extended, because karma is not what happens after the action. Karma is the quality of mind the action was made from. The opening verses of the Dhammapada place this at the very beginning of the teaching. These verses open one of the oldest surviving collections of the Buddha's words, and it matters that this is where the collection begins. Not with cosmology or rules of conduct. With this, mind is the forerunner of all actions. All deeds are led by mind, created by mind. If one speaks or acts with a corrupted mind, suffering follows, as the wheel follows the hoof of an ox. If one speaks or acts with a serene mind, happiness follows as a shadow that never departs. A corrupted mind, in this teaching, does not mean a wicked mind. It means a mind operating from craving, aversion, or confusion, reaching for things to be different from how they are, pushing away what is present, responding to an old situation rather than the one actually here. Any of those states distorts what the mind produces. not through moral failure, but through disorientation. The action that comes from a distorted orientation carries that distortion forward, regardless of what it looks like from outside. A serene mind does not mean a mind without emotion or care. It means a mind whose actions are not being driven by those contractions. A mind able to act from what it genuinely is, rather than from what fear or habit or the need for a particular outcome is currently demanding of it. This is not a teaching about suppressing what arises. It is not asking anyone to stop wanting things to go well or to stop feeling when they go badly. Craving and aversion are not problems because they contain desire or feeling. They are problems because they distort the orientation of the mind. They cause the mind to reach and push in ways that pull it away from what is actually present. The serene mind the teaching points toward is not an empty mind. It is a mind that can want things, feel real things, and still remain stable enough in its orientation that what it produces from that stability is clear. The image of the ox and the wheel is worth staying with. An ox does not decide to drag the cart. There is no deliberation. The ox walks and the wheel follows because that is the nature of the connection between them. No choice is made. No moment of selecting from alternatives. Just the automatic consequence of the movement. This is how habitual intention operates. The mind holds an orientation built through what has been practiced, reinforced, allowed to run without examination across hundreds of similar moments. And from that orientation, action flows. The action produces results. The results confirm the orientation. The ox walks the same path again. The wheel follows more easily. Walk any path long enough, and it begins to feel like the only path available. The mind moves into it without registering that it is doing so. The path is so well worn that moving into it feels natural rather than conditioned. The shadow image works differently. A shadow follows without effort. You do not pull it. It follows because of what it is attached to. The clarity and genuine care that the Buddha associates with a serene mind follow the same way. They do not have to be manufactured. They are what becomes available when the contractions of craving, aversion, and confusion stop monopolizing the field. The practice does not construct these qualities. The practice removes what has accumulated on top of them. Intention, in this teaching, is not the word as most people use it. It is not a plan formed in advance, not the conscious decision made just before an action, not the thought, I intend to do this. It is the entire quality and orientation of the mind in the moment of acting, including orientations the mind is not aware of. Consider what happens when someone says something that lands badly. Before any thought forms, before any deliberation occurs, something changes. The body tightens. The voice shifts. Something comes out with an edge that was not chosen. Was that intended? In the ordinary sense, no, nobody planned it. But in the Buddha's sense, intention was fully present. A quality of mind was operating, reactive, contracted, moving from aversion, and that quality shaped what emerged. Karma was created in under a second without anything being selected consciously. Intention also runs through movements so quiet they do not feel like actions at all. The way attention adjusts when someone less interesting begins to speak. The slight shift in warmth toward a person based on whether they currently have anything to offer. The small modifications to what you say so a particular impression is maintained. The impulse to reach for a phone the moment a gap of discomfort opens. The mild dismissal of information that complicates what you already believe. None of these feel significant. They feel like Tuesday, but each one is the ox walking. Each carries the quality of the mind that produced it. Each creates karma from that quality. Most people, when asked to identify a moment of karma creation, point to a significant choice, a decision about a relationship, a moment of honesty or dishonesty with real stakes, a choice made under genuine pressure. These moments matter, but they represent a fraction of the karma created in any given day. The far larger portion is produced in moments nobody would select as significant. The quality of attention brought to a task when nobody is watching. The warmth in a voice when the person spoken to has nothing the speaker needs. The honesty of a small observation made to someone who cannot verify it. These are ordinary moments. They are also where the quality of the mind most clearly shows what it is actually made of. What this requires acknowledging is that the quality of the mind in any given moment is not primarily shaped by what that moment contains. It is shaped by what the mind has been practicing. A mind that has run reactive patterns across many ordinary situations arrives in a difficult situation already moving from those patterns. The difficult situation does not create the orientation. It reveals what was already there. This is why working only on visible behavior produces changes that are thinner than they appear. Most people who want to work on themselves address what they do, say better things, make more generous choices, avoid the actions that reliably produce regret. The effort is real, but it attends to the cart rather than the ox. Adjust the visible action without changing the quality of mind generating it, and the change holds only in conditions where it does not cost much. Under ease, where circumstances are favorable and no particular trigger is present, the modified behavior functions. Under fatigue, under criticism, under the specific circumstances that have historically activated the old pattern, the original orientation reasserts itself. Because the root was not addressed, the behavior was adjusted. The mind producing the behavior was not touched. Two people sitting in the same meeting decide not to say something critical they could easily say. The first holds back because they have calculated, again, that the criticism creates more complications than it resolves. A decision made in the moment, from a mind that still contains the criticism and is managing it. The second holds back because genuine goodwill toward the person is currently stronger than the irritation. Not managing anything, simply present from a different orientation. The visible action is identical. One is suppression. The other is something more honest operating naturally. The karma is not the same. The distinction matters not because of any judgment about which person is better, but because the second approach is actually sustainable in a way the first is not. A mind managing its own contents is always under some degree of strain. A mind operating from genuine goodwill has nothing to suppress. Between what arrives and what the mind does next, there is a space. Most people, most of the time, find this space very small. Something happens and a response is already forming before anything has been examined. The accumulated orientation of the mind, shaped by many similar situations and many similar responses, determines the next action before any conscious awareness can follow. The sequence completes itself and is passed before it becomes visible. This gap is where intention lives, where karma is actually made, not in the significant deliberate choices that receive time and attention, in the small automatic movements that run before attention arrives, the judgment formed before genuine looking, the assumption so fast it was never recognized as an assumption, the warmth withheld or extended from a quality of mind that was never examined. The gap narrows under conditions that resemble previous conditions where the same response formed. The mind, moving toward familiar territory, accelerates into its established pattern. What narrows the gap is accumulated momentum, the same response practiced so many times that it runs before attention can find it. This is not dysfunction. It is what any repeated practice produces, whether or not the training was conscious. What widens the gap is consistent attention paid to what is arising in the mind before it becomes action. Not in the moments of highest pressure, those move too fast and compress everything. In the ordinary moments when there is actually room to look, the irritation before the words that carry it form, the wanting before the reaching begins, the response still assembling itself before it has completed. These are workable moments, low enough pressure that attention can function before the habit fully launches. Mindfulness, in the Buddha's teaching, is precisely this practice. Not clearing the mind of thought, not achieving a particular state of calm, the clear and non-reactive knowing of what is present in the mind right now before it shapes what comes next. This knowing is not analysis. It does not require understanding why something is arising or tracing it to its history. It requires only that the arising be seen clearly enough to create a small amount of space between the arising and the automatic response. The space does not have to be large to be useful. A half second of recognition that the mind is currently moving from aversion, just that, is enough to change what comes next, at least sometimes. And sometimes is how the practice starts. The first time someone catches a reaction forming, pauses inside it, however briefly, and responds from something more honest than the automatic, something becomes available in the experience that was not available before. Not dramatic, more like a brief recognition of being the one taking the action rather than the one being carried by it. That recognition is what the practice is building toward, not a destination, a gradually more available quality of presence in the moments that matter. Over time, the moments where the mind operates from its wholesome roots, genuine care, honest seeing, goodwill that is not performed, become more visible and more accessible. Not because they occur more, but because attention has become trained enough to catch them. Caught clearly, they can be understood. Understood, they can be cultivated. The practice feeds itself. What began as deliberate attention gradually becomes a more natural quality of noticing, something the mind does without requiring effort each time. Kunda brought genuine care to a morning that ended in grief and accusation. What he brought was not erased by what followed, not revised by what people said afterward, not measured by the outcome. The karma was already complete in the quality of mind he had carried to that meal. The mind had gone before. Everything else followed from what it had already set. The teaching does not ask you to control what follows. Outcomes are shaped by more conditions than any single mind can manage. What others make of your actions is not yours to determine. What the world does with your offering is outside your hands. What is inside your hands, fully, always, is the quality of what the mind brings to this moment. Its actual orientation, the roots currently running, the quality present in the action before the action becomes visible. That quality can be noticed in the moment the irritated reply is forming but has not yet come out. In the moment, the mind reaches for distraction, and the reaching is seen before the hand moves. In the moment, a familiar interpretation begins assembling itself, and there is just enough space to check whether it is accurate. These are available moments. They are more frequent than most people realize, because most people have not been looking for them. What is noticed can be worked with. What is worked with can change. Not through exceptional effort or circumstances that cooperate first. Through honest attention paid to what the mind is actually doing, rather than only what the behavior looks like from outside. The mind goes before. Every action in every ordinary day settles the question of what it brings, which means every ordinary day is the practice, and every moment of noticing is a moment where something genuinely different becomes possible. Knowing that the mind can meet difficulty differently is one thing. Actually meeting it differently, in the moment, difficulty arrives. When the body is tense and the situation is real, is something else entirely. The practice does not stay abstract for long. It gets tested, and the most direct test is pain. There is a teaching in the tradition about exactly this, about what happens when pain arrives and what the mind does next. It comes from a conversation between two monks, one dying, one visiting. Assaji was one of the 5 monks who first followed the Buddha. He was there at the beginning, before the Sangha had a name, before the teachings had spread beyond a small group of wanderers in the forest near Benares. He had practiced for decades. He had seen people come and go. He had sat through more seasons than he could count. Now he was ill, seriously ill, the kind of illness that does not lift and return, the kind that settles in and makes itself at home. His body was failing. He could feel it. Sariputta, one of the most accomplished practitioners in the entire community, came to visit. He sat with Assaji in the way you sit with someone who is genuinely suffering, not hurriedly, not with answers ready. He asked how things were. Assaji told him honestly. The physical pain he could manage. That was not what he wanted to talk about. What was difficult, what had been pulling at him, was something else. He had lost the ability to enter the deep states of meditation he had known throughout his practice. The stillness that had been available to him for years was no longer reachable. He would sit, try, and find nothing but resistance and agitation. And then he would feel ashamed of the agitation, troubled by his inability to achieve what he once achieved, preoccupied with the gap between what he had been and what he now was. Sariputta listened without interrupting. Then he asked a question that cut straight to the center of what Assaji was describing. Is your peace of mind dependent on reaching those states? Is your sense of having practiced well tied to the body's ability to cooperate? What followed was not a lecture. Sariputta simply pointed to what was actually happening in Assaji's experience. The illness was real. The pain was real. The loss of certain capacities was real. None of that was under dispute. But there was something else present, a second layer of suffering being added to the first. The resistance to how things were. The self-judgment about what his practice should still be able to produce. The running comparison between this Assaji and the Assaji of 10 years ago. As Sariputta spoke, Assaji became still, not because the pain went away, not because the illness improved, but because he could see, clearly, without flinching, the difference between the suffering that the illness brought and the suffering he had been adding to it himself. The illness was one thing. The struggle with the illness was another. And the second, he now saw, was optional. That recognition did not arrive with drama. It arrived quietly, as most real recognitions do. Not as an idea Assaji accepted because it sounded correct, but as something he could see directly in his own experience. He had been carrying two things simultaneously and treating them as one. The illness and the war with the illness. The pain and the story about what the pain made him. Now they were separate. The illness was still there, but it was just the illness. And just the illness, it turned out, was considerably lighter than the illness plus everything he had added. The teaching that holds this distinction most precisely is called the two arrows. It comes from the Buddha directly, and it is one of the most practically useful teachings in the entire tradition. When a person who has not understood the nature of experience is struck by pain, physical or otherwise, they experience two kinds of suffering. The first is the pain itself. The second is the suffering created by how the mind responds to that pain. The Buddha described this as being struck by one arrow and then immediately struck by a second. The first arrow is the pain. The second arrow is what the mind does with the pain. The first arrow cannot always be avoided. Illness arrives. Loss arrives. Disappointment arrives. People leave or stay in ways that hurt. Circumstances collapse when they were counted on. These are the first arrows. They belong to the nature of a conditioned life, a life lived in a body, in relationship with other people, in circumstances that do not always cooperate. No practice, however sincere and however sustained, guarantees immunity from the first arrow. It was never supposed to. The second arrow is different. The second arrow is always optional. This needs to be said carefully, because the word optional can make it sound like a matter of willpower. like the person who keeps suffering after a loss is making a choice they could simply reverse if they tried harder. That is not what the teaching means, and that misreading has caused genuine harm to people who were already struggling. Optional, in this teaching, means that the second arrow does not come from the situation itself. It comes from a layer of mental activity added to the situation, one that operates through habit, not deliberate decision, and that can be seen and gradually changed. Not controlled, not suppressed, seen. The second arrow takes many forms. Most of them sound reasonable when they first arrive. There is the arrow of catastrophizing. The pain is real. What gets added is the story about what the pain means for the future, that it will never stop, that things will only get worse, that the current difficulty is evidence of a trajectory that ends badly. This story is not the pain. It is the mind's projection, running ahead of what is actually known, creating suffering that extends into a future that has not arrived. There is the arrow of self-blame. Something painful has happened. A relationship has ended. A project has failed. A body has gotten sick. The question that follows, what did I do wrong? What is wrong with me? Why am I like this? Is not the pain of the original situation. It is a second pain, added by a mind turning toward itself with accusation. They are not the same thing, even though they often arrive so quickly together that they seem like one. There is the arrow of comparison. The experience of being in pain while believing that others are handling it better adds isolation and inadequacy to what is already hard. The pain does not require the comparison. The comparison is something the mind has added. There is the arrow of resistance, the sustained mental argument with the fact that this is happening at all. The thought, however clearly or quietly it runs, this should not be happening. I should not be here. This is not how things were supposed to go. The actual situation may be difficult. The resistance to it is a separate suffering. The insistence that reality should be arranged differently. There is also the arrow of explanation, the extended search for why this happened, which is really a search for control disguised as curiosity. The mind that keeps asking why the relationship ended, why the diagnosis arrived, why this situation rather than another, is often not actually seeking information. It is seeking a story in which the pain could have been prevented, and therefore could still be, in the future, if only the right lesson can be found. The searching is not the situation. It is another layer added on top. And there is the arrow that Assaji knew, the arrow of grief about one's own diminishment. He had lost something real. He was no longer able to do what he had once done. That loss was a first arrow, but the layer of shame about the loss, the evaluation of himself as a practitioner based on what his body could no longer do, the comparison to an earlier version of himself that had more capacity, that was a second arrow, firing steadily and privately in the quiet of his own mind. None of these second arrows feel like choices. They feel like conclusions, like the natural, inevitable response to a hard situation. This is what makes them so difficult to work with. Not that they are powerful, but that they appear to be accurate. Catastrophizing feels like realistic assessment. Self-blame feels like honest accountability. Resistance feels like healthy refusal to accept something unacceptable. They wear the clothes of reasonable thought. The test the teaching offers is simple. Ask, is this thought about the actual situation I am in right now? Or is it about a story built on top of the actual situation? The pain in the body is a situation. The conviction that it will never end is a story. The failed relationship is a situation. The assessment that it proves something permanent about your worth is a story. The job that was lost is a situation. The narrative about the kind of person who loses jobs is a story. The test works in real time as well as in reflection. When you find yourself in pain and the mind begins to run, begin by asking, what is actually here, right now, in this moment? Not what might come next, not what this means, not what it says about you or about the future. What is present right now? The pain is there. What else is there? Often, when the stories are set aside even briefly, what remains is more manageable than the mind made it. Not easy, but workable. The situation without the narrative around it occupies a smaller space than the situation plus everything added to it. Situations are first arrows. Stories built on situations are second arrows. Not shooting the second arrow is, in the Buddha's teaching, one of the most direct forms of wholesome karma available to a person in difficulty. This deserves to be stated plainly because it runs against what most people assume about hard times and spiritual practice. Most people assume that difficult circumstances mean difficult karma, that being in pain or loss or illness is a sign of unwholesome karma, and that the appropriate response is to do better in order to generate better conditions in the future. The Two Arrows teaching says something different. It says that the quality of karma being created right now depends not on whether the first arrow has arrived, but on what the mind does when it arrives. A person sitting with genuine physical illness, who can feel the pain clearly and stay with it without adding a story about what the pain means, without fighting the experience of the moment, without turning toward themselves with accusation, that person is creating wholesome karma in the middle of suffering. Not despite the suffering, in it. From the same roots described earlier, without grasping at how things should be, without aversion to how things are, with something approaching honest seeing of the actual situation. A person in comfortable circumstances who is nevertheless running a steady second arrow, a quiet story of resentment or self-judgment or comparison that runs beneath an otherwise functional life, is creating unwholesome karma from comfort. Not dramatically, steadily. The arrows sought by orientation, not by circumstance. This is what Sariputta helped Asaji see. The illness was not going to improve because Asaji changed his relationship to it. His body was doing what bodies do. But the layer of suffering he had been adding, the shame, the comparison, the accumulated argument with his own diminishment, that was not required by the illness. It was added by the mind, running through its habitual movements, reaching for something it could no longer have. When Asaji saw this, not as an idea but as the actual texture of his own experience, something changed. Not the illness, the relationship to the illness. And in that shift, A form of ease became available that the illness could not touch because it did not come from the body. Practically, working with the second arrow does not require achieving a particular state of calm. It begins with a far more modest capacity, the ability to notice that a second arrow has just been fired. Not to stop it from being fired. In the beginning especially, the noticing comes after. The arrow lands, the story runs, and then, somewhere in the middle of the story, or at the end of it, or perhaps only when you are lying in the dark the following night, a small recognition forms. That was a second arrow. That was me, adding something to a situation that was already hard enough. That recognition, however late it comes, changes something. Not the past, the arrow already fired, but the next moment. Because once the distinction is visible, even imperfectly and after the fact, the mind has begun to see in a way it did not see before. And seeing, in this teaching, is the beginning of freedom from what is seen. The second time it happens, the second time a second arrow is caught and named, even after the fact, the recognition comes slightly more easily. Not because effort was applied, but because the mind has now seen this pattern once. It knows what it looks like. It has a reference point. The pattern is no longer completely invisible. It is a known shape in a familiar landscape. And known shapes are easier to catch than unknown ones. Over time, the noticing comes earlier. Still not before the arrow fires. That takes considerable practice, and even experienced practitioners do not always manage it. But earlier in the story, before it has run its full course, in the middle of the catastrophizing, rather than at the end of it, in the middle of the self-blame, rather than after it has settled into a mood that colors the whole day. And eventually, not always, not reliably, but sometimes, there is a moment where the second arrow is seen as it forms, where the mind catches the movement toward the story before the story has begun, and the catching itself creates a pause. In that pause, the pain is still there. The first arrow is still fully present, but the second arrow is visible rather than automatic. And in that visibility, a choice becomes possible that was not possible before. Not the choice to feel nothing, not the choice to be serene in conditions that warrant distress, the choice of what to do with the mind's own movement toward adding. Most people discover, when they begin working with this, that the second arrow they fire most reliably is not the most obvious one. Not the catastrophizing that is clearly out of proportion. The one they fire most often is the subtle, persistent, deeply habitual arrow that has been running for so long it has become indistinguishable from how things are. The quiet story about what difficulty means about them. The low-level resistance to the ordinary friction of a life that does not always go smoothly. The mild but constant comparison between how things are and how they should be. These are the second arrows that create the most suffering over a lifetime. Not through intensity, but through duration. Not through the occasional crisis, but through the steady accumulation of small additional suffering added to every ordinary difficulty, every minor frustration, every moment when the first arrow lands and the second immediately follows. The practice asks only for the gradually increasing, developing ability to notice when one has been fired, to see it clearly for what it is, and to return, however briefly, however incompletely, to the first arrow and only the first arrow. Just the pain, just the situation, just what is actually here. That return is not resignation. It is not giving up on the wish for things to be different. It is simply removing the extra weight, the story, the self-judgment, the resistance, and finding out what the situation weighs without them. Almost always, what remains is more workable than what the second arrow made it feel like. The night Assaji stopped fighting his illness, he did not become well. His body continued as before. The pain was the same pain, but something he had been carrying, a weight that had nothing to do with the illness, was set down. The illness remained fully present, but for the first time in a long time, only the illness was present. Not the illness and the war with it, not the pain and the story about what the pain meant. The first arrow, and only the first arrow. That, it turned out, was something he could actually bear. The preparations were already underway when the leader of the group stopped. He had done this many times before. He knew what fear looked like and what people did when it had them. He had seen bargaining and pleading and the particular desperation of someone fighting against what was coming. What he was looking at now, the monk sitting quietly, completely present, not doing any of those things, did not match anything he had seen before. He asked directly, "Why aren't you afraid?" His name was Alavaka. He led a group of bandits who had captured a monk from the Buddha's community, a practitioner named Adhimutta, with the intention of using him as a ritual sacrifice. The monk was bound. The preparations were ready. Everything that was about to happen was clear to everyone present. What was not clear to Alavaka was this: how someone could see the situation exactly as it was, fully, without distancing himself from it, and remain completely still. Not gone, not absent, present to everything happening around him. The voices, the preparations, the particular quality of that night, receiving all of it. And not afraid, not suppressing it, not pretending the situation was other than what it was, present with the full reality of what was about to happen, and somehow not adding the layer of suffering that reality usually generates. Adhimutta's answer was not a performance of serenity. It was a description of something he had come to see clearly through practice. He explained that for someone who no longer carries a sense of something precious that must be defended at all costs, no accumulated self that needs protecting, the situation, while clearly dangerous, does not produce what fear requires to form. Danger was present. The feeling of danger was present, but the movement from feeling to the specific suffering of fear, the grasping at survival, the aversion to death, the frantic story of everything that would be lost, that movement did not follow automatically. The feeling arose. It was recognized, and it did not generate the next step in the chain. Alavaka listened. He was a man who had lived by violence. He understood threat and response. He understood the economy of survival. What he was hearing from this monk was something outside that economy entirely, and he found he could not dismiss it. He released Adhimutta. He asked him to explain further. The others in the group gathered to listen as well. What followed in the tradition is a record of Adhimutta teaching them, former bandits sitting with a monk they had been about to kill, listening to an explanation of why the fear they expected had not arrived. It is one of the stranger and more human moments in the early texts. Violence meeting a particular kind of stillness, and the violence not knowing what to do with it. This story is preserved in the Theragatha, the verses of the elder monks. It is not a story about supernatural calm or the absence of sensation. It is a story about what becomes possible when a practitioner has learned to see the difference between a feeling and what the mind normally does with that feeling. Between the sensation and the story that the sensation triggers. That distinction is the entire territory of what this teaching calls the feeling tone. Everything experienced has a quality, not an emotion, not a mood, not a complex mental state, but a more basic quality that precedes all of those. Something feels pleasant. Something feels unpleasant. Something feels neutral, neither pulling toward nor pushing away. Most people, when asked what they are feeling, describe emotions: anxious, excited, frustrated, sad. These are real, but they are already several steps downstream from what this teaching is pointing at. Emotions are complex constructions, blends of thought, memory, physical sensation, and expectation. The feeling tone is simpler and earlier than any of that. It is the raw quality of the contact before the construction begins. Think of the moment a message arrives on a phone before you read it. The body registers something, a quality of anticipation or dread or mild interest, before any content is known. That registration is close to what this teaching means by feeling tone, not the emotion that follows from reading the message. The quality present in the moment of contact itself. It is also the quality that is present in every other moment, not just the obviously significant ones. This quality is the feeling tone. It arrives before thought. It arrives before the emotion that thought will generate. It is the first thing the mind contacts in any experience, and it arrives so quickly that most people have never separated it from what follows. The unpleasant feeling tone of criticism arrives before the defensiveness that defends against it. The pleasant feeling tone of praise arrives before the grasping that wants more of it. The neutral feeling tone of a gap between tasks arrives before the restlessness that reaches for stimulation to fill it. In each case, the feeling tone is one thing. The mind's automatic response to the feeling tone is something else, and it is in that response that karma is made. The Buddha described this in what is called the chain of dependent arising, a map of how suffering comes into being from the conditions that precede it. The chain has many links, but for practice, the most critical one is this: feeling tone gives rise to craving. When something feels pleasant, the mind reaches for more of it. When something feels unpleasant, the mind pushes it away. Either movement is craving, either toward or away from what is present, and from craving comes clinging, and from clinging comes the suffering of being unable to hold what is pleasant or unable to escape what is unpleasant. Consider a simple sequence. Someone is working on a task and it is going well. The quality of that, the pleasant tone of things flowing, arises. The mind notices, and immediately, without any deliberation, a movement begins, wanting this to continue, wanting to extend it, a subtle anxiety at the edge of the pleasantness about what happens when it ends. None of that was chosen. The pleasant feeling tone arose, and the reaching followed automatically. Then the task hits a difficulty. The quality shifts. Something unpleasant arrives. Friction, frustration, the sense of not being able to do what was just being done easily. And immediately, without deliberation, a different movement begins, wanting to stop, wanting distraction, a mild resistance to continuing. Again, not chosen. The unpleasant feeling tone arose, and the pushing away followed automatically. Neither sequence required any input from the person having the experience. The feeling tone arrived, and the chain ran itself. That is the mechanism that was always running beneath the surface. This is what fires the second arrow without permission, not a decision to suffer, a sensation arising, and the mind automatically converting that sensation into reaching or pushing, a movement so habitual that it completes itself before attention arrives. The pleasant feeling tone is the most obvious. When something feels good, the mind wants more. The desire to extend the pleasant meal, the pleasant conversation, the pleasant feeling of being liked or admired. This is automatic. The movement toward more is already happening before any decision to want more has been made. And that movement, compounded across 1,000 ordinary moments, is one of the primary engines of craving. The unpleasant feeling tone is equally immediate. When something feels bad, the mind moves away. The slight flinch at criticism, the internal withdrawal when a task feels tedious, the reflexive distraction when sitting with discomfort becomes possible, all automatic. The movement away from the unpleasant is already happening before any choice to avoid has been made. And this movement, compounded across 1,000 ordinary moments, is one of the primary engines of aversion. But the neutral feeling tone is in some ways the most consequential, and it is the least examined. When something feels neither pleasant nor unpleasant, the mind tends to disengage, to stop registering clearly what is present, to drift toward thinking about the past or future, or to reach for something that does have a pleasant quality. The phone, the distraction, the small stimulation that breaks the flatness of the neutral moment. This automatic disengagement is the movement through which confusion deepens, not through dramatic wrong decisions, but through the steady habit of not being fully present to what is actually here when it is neither pleasant nor unpleasant. Most of a life is lived in the neutral register, the vast middle ground between the moments of obvious pleasure and obvious pain. If the practice only addresses the obvious ends, the intense pleasure, the acute pain, it misses the territory where karma is most consistently created. The ordinary neutral stretch of an ordinary day, moved through on automatic, under the influence of conditioning that has never been examined. That neutral stretch is also the territory where the most durable habits are formed. Not the dramatic reactions to intense experience. Those are visible enough to sometimes be caught. But the steady, unremarkable movement through the flat middle ground of a day, the habitual reaching for stimulation, the habitual dimming of attention when nothing seems to demand it. This is where conditioning deepens most quietly, most reliably, and most consistently. The practice this teaching points toward is simple to describe and genuinely difficult to establish as a habit. It is the practice of noticing the feeling tone before the automatic response to the feeling tone completes itself. Not stopping the response. In the beginning especially, the noticing comes after the response has already run. The pleasant moment has already generated reaching. The unpleasant moment has already generated pushing. The noticing arrives late, but late noticing is still noticing. And noticing, even late, is the beginning of a different relationship to the sequence. What the noticing does, over time, is insert a sliver of awareness between the feeling tone and the automatic response. Not a gap large enough to make a decision, at least not at first. Just enough awareness that the sequence is no longer completely invisible. The feeling tone arises, and somewhere in the middle of the reaching or pushing that follows, a recognition forms. This is pleasant and the mind is reaching. This is unpleasant and the mind is pushing away. That recognition is not the same as the response. It is the beginning of the space between the feeling and what the mind does with it. There is a distinction that must be made clearly, because it is the most common misunderstanding in working with this practice. Noticing is not suppression. They feel different from the inside, but from the outside they can look similar. Both involve not immediately acting on the reaching or pushing. The difference is this: suppression holds the response down. Noticing sees the response clearly and, through the seeing, reduces its momentum. One is effort applied against the movement. The other is clarity applied to it. Here is a way to feel the difference from the inside. Suppression has a quality of holding or pressing, a sense of containing something that wants to move. You can feel the effort of it, the pleasant feeling being held away from, the unpleasant feeling being held down. The body tends to tighten. The effort tends to leak, eventually, into something: impatience, brittle calm, the sudden disproportionate reaction when the accumulation becomes too much. Observation has a different quality. There is no pressing. The feeling tone is allowed to be exactly what it is. The response to it is allowed to begin, and in the beginning, it is seen rather than stopped. The body stays relatively open. What is released through noticing is not suppressed into somewhere else. It moves through and completes itself without generating the next layer of the chain. Suppression creates its own problems. What is held down does not disappear, it accumulates. The person who suppresses pleasant reaching becomes brittle around pleasure. The person who suppresses unpleasant pushing becomes brittle around difficulty. The pressure builds. The practice of noticing does not hold anything down. It allows the feeling tone to be fully felt and the automatic response to be clearly seen. In that seeing, the response gradually loses some of its authority, not because it was defeated, but because it was no longer invisible. Adhimutta did not suppress the feeling of danger. The danger was fully present to him. The feeling tone of something extremely unpleasant was there. He did not push it away or pretend it was not what it was. He saw it clearly and stayed with it. And the next movement in the chain, the one that converts unpleasant feeling into the grasping panic of fear, simply did not follow with its usual automaticity. This is what the practice builds toward, not the elimination of feeling tones. They will continue to arise as long as there is experience, not the suppression of the responses they generate. Suppression, as will become clear, is not practice, but the gradually increasing clarity about what the feeling tone is and what it is not, what belongs to the situation and what the mind has added, where the experience ends and the story about the experience begins. Before going into what this looks like in ordinary life, it is worth pausing on why this practice, simple as it sounds, is so rarely what actually happens. The reason is speed. The feeling tone and the automatic response to it happen together in the same instant as a single event. By the time awareness arrives, the response is already running. The reaching is already underway. The pushing away is already in motion. The elaborate story about what the neutral moment needs in order to become more interesting is already half formed. To see the feeling tone before the response to it completes itself requires a kind of attentiveness that most people's minds are not accustomed to, not because it is difficult in any technical sense, but because it runs against the grain of habitual speed. The mind moves fast. The practice is to be just slightly faster than the habit. In ordinary terms, what this looks like is quieter than it sounds. A conversation that would usually produce a pleasant feeling tone, being agreed with, being admired, receiving good news, is met with a soft noting, pleasant. And in that noting, the reaching that usually follows is seen as reaching rather than lived through automatically. The pleasant feeling is still pleasant. Nothing is suppressed. But the automatic movement toward more of it is visible as a movement, rather than invisible as simply what happens. A task that would usually produce an unpleasant feeling tone, criticism, tedium, physical discomfort, is met with the same soft noting, unpleasant. The unpleasantness is still unpleasant, but the movement away from it, the distraction, the avoidance, the story about what the unpleasantness means, is seen as a movement rather than lived through automatically. And the neutral stretches, the time between tasks, the gaps in conversation, the ordinary minutes of an ordinary day, are met with enough presence to register them as what they are, rather than passed through in the rush to find something more stimulating. This is a practice that can be taken up immediately in conditions that already exist. No special circumstances are required. No formal practice periods, though those help. The feeling tones are arising constantly, with every conversation, every task, every moment of contact with any aspect of experience. Each arising is an opportunity to notice. It does not matter whether the arising is dramatic or unremarkable. The mechanism is the same in both. Each noticing is a small intervention in the automatic chain. Each intervention is wholesome karma being created, not through extraordinary action, but through the quality of attention brought to what is already here. The Satipatthana Sutta, the most detailed map of mindfulness practice in the Pali Canon, gives specific instructions for contemplating feeling tones. The practitioner is instructed to know, clearly and without elaboration, when a pleasant feeling tone arises, that a pleasant feeling tone is present. When an unpleasant feeling tone arises, to know that an unpleasant feeling tone is present. When a neutral feeling tone arises, to know that a neutral feeling tone is present. Nothing more. Not to analyze where the feeling came from, not to judge whether it should be there, not to imagine what it will lead to, simply to know clearly what is present. That simplicity is genuinely deceptive. For a mind accustomed to elaborating every sensation into a narrative, staying with the bare knowing of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral without immediately generating the next layer, requires real, sustained practice. But the instruction is simple because what it points toward is simple. The feeling tone is one thing. Everything added after it is something the mind has constructed from that feeling, shaped by conditioning, reinforced through repetition. See the construction clearly enough. See it as construction rather than as fact, and its authority over what comes next begins to loosen. In practice, this comes down to a moment repeated many times. Something arrives, a word, a silence, a task. A quality is present, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Can that quality be met right now, without the automatic movement toward or away from it? Not always, not immediately, but sometimes. And sometimes, treated as a beginning rather than a failure, is genuinely enough. He came slowly. An old man, body failing, the world narrowing around him for years. He sat with the Buddha and said something honest. I am old, I am sick, and I rarely get to be here anymore. He had not renounced the world. He had simply lived long enough in it that the world had begun to show him what it actually was. He came to see the Buddha and said something plain. He was old. His body hurt. It had been that way for a long time. He did not get to visit the teachers or the community as often as he would have liked. He missed it. He said all of this without complaint, exactly, more with the quiet honesty of someone who had stopped performing wellness. The Buddha's response was not comfort. It was a distinction. There is a quality to that response that differs from what most teachers offer to someone in pain. No suggestion that things might improve. No reassurance that meaning could be found in the difficulty. No teaching about what the illness might be making possible. Simply, yes, that is what a body is. You have understood something accurately. He said, yes, that is how it is. This body, the body any person carries, is fragile. It is prone to illness. Anyone who carries it and expects otherwise does not understand what a body is. That part of what Nakulapita described was true, would continue to be true, and there was nothing to be done about it. But then he said, even though the body is sick, do not let the mind fall sick as well. This was not encouragement. It was a teaching. The body's condition was given. The mind's condition was not. Nakulapita carried this home. Sometime later, Sariputta, one of the most gifted teachers in the community, found him and asked how things were. Nakulapita repeated what the Buddha had said. Sariputta saw that Nakulapita did not fully understand it, and he offered an explanation. A mind that is sick, Sariputta said, is a mind that identifies with the body. That believes the body is what you are. That takes the state of the body as the state of the self. So when the body is in pain, the self is in pain. When the body is weakening, the self is weakening. When the body moves toward death, the self moves toward death. The body's condition and the mind's condition have become a single merged thing, and whatever happens to one immediately happens to the other. A mind that is not sick is a mind that sees clearly. It sees the body as a condition, present, real, attended to, but not as what the person fundamentally is. The pain is fully felt. The weakness is not denied, but the mind observing those conditions is not identical with them. It is not collapsing into them. There is some space, however narrow, however fragile, between what the body is experiencing and what the mind is making of that experience. What Sariputta described is what this tradition calls acceptance. It is a precise term for a very precise thing, and it is nothing like what most people mean when they use that word. Most people hear acceptance and understand it as one of two things: being okay with what happened or giving up. Neither of those is what the teaching means. Acceptance, in this tradition, is precise seeing. It is seeing what is present exactly as it is, without adding to it, without subtracting from it, without insisting that it should be different. Not because things cannot change, not because effort is pointless, but because the mind that can see what is actually here, rather than what it wishes were here, or what it fears might arrive, or what it cannot stop going back to, is the only mind capable of responding usefully to what is actually here. Acceptance is not the same as approval. You can accept that something difficult is happening without approving of it. You can accept a situation you are working to change. What changes with acceptance is not the situation. What changes is the mind's relationship to the situation. The resistance, the sustained argument with the fact that this is how things currently are, is removed. And when the resistance is removed, the mind can actually look at what is in front of it. Most people operate with an implicit contract with experience. If I do what I am supposed to do, if I make good decisions, if I am careful enough, things will remain as I want them to be. This contract is never stated and never consciously made, but it operates constantly, and when it is broken, when the illness arrives, when the relationship ends, when the work fails, when the body declines, the mind responds not just to the difficulty but to the violation. This should not be happening. I did not agree to this. The second layer of suffering in almost every difficult situation contains this unspoken protest. And the protest is not against the situation. It is against reality having terms different from the ones the mind agreed to. Acceptance is the release of the contract, not as defeat, but as accurate perception, Reality has never held still for anyone's expectations, and the mind that can finally see that clearly has stopped spending its energy on something that was never possible. The Buddha's teaching on impermanence, the observation that all conditioned things arise and pass away, that nothing that can change is permanent, that what is stable today will not be stable indefinitely, is the foundation of acceptance in this tradition, not as a philosophical position, but as something to be seen directly in experience. When the mind genuinely sees that what is present is impermanent, not as an idea but as a felt reality, the grip on things being a particular way begins to relax. There is nothing to argue with. Impermanent things are impermanent. The argument with that is what generates suffering. Nakulapita's body was impermanent. He could see this clearly because he was old and had been watching the evidence accumulate for decades. The teaching the Buddha offered was not new information about impermanence. It was an invitation to see the impermanence already visible in his own experience without adding a second layer of suffering to it. The suffering of resistance, of identification, of treating the condition of the body as the verdict on the self. Here is the distinction that matters most, because it prevents acceptance from being confused with resignation. Accepting what is present does not mean accepting what will be. Accepting that a relationship is in difficulty right now does not mean accepting that it cannot improve. Accepting that the body is unwell today does not mean accepting that treatment is futile. Accepting that something painful happened does not mean accepting that nothing can be done differently in the future. What acceptance addresses is the present. This is happening now. This is the condition that currently exists. The mind can meet that condition clearly, without the additional suffering of arguing with its existence, and still act, still address, still work to change what can be changed. The person who cannot accept that a situation is genuinely difficult cannot work with it clearly. Their energy goes into the argument with the difficulty. The person who can accept that the situation is difficult as it is, without adding the layer of resistance, without the sustained insistence that it should be otherwise, has all their clarity available to actually respond to what is in front of them. Acceptance does not reduce agency. It is the precondition of all genuine agency. There is also a dimension of acceptance that is directed not at present conditions, but at the past. Not at what is happening now, but at what has already happened and cannot be changed, and is nevertheless still being carried. Most people carry something from their past that continues to generate the second arrow, an old decision that still produces self-blame, a role in a relationship or situation that produced harm, however unintentionally, a period of behavior that is out of alignment with who the person wants to be or has become. The event is over. The condition that caused it may have changed entirely, but the mind still holds the charge, still returns to the moment, still applies the verdict, still uses it as evidence. The acceptance the practice asks for here is not amnesia. It is not pretending the past was other than what it was. It is something more difficult and more useful, seeing the past as a condition that arose from the causes and circumstances that were present at the time, seeing that the person who acted then was acting from whatever understanding, whatever clarity or confusion, whatever pain or blindness was available to them, and releasing the continued insistence that a different person should have been present at that moment. There is also the accumulated self-criticism that has nothing to do with specific events. The general verdict many people carry about what kind of person they are, assembled over years from evidence that was real but interpreted through a particular lens. Insufficient, not enough, behind where they should be by now. These are not conclusions arising from fresh looking. They are narratives so old they feel like facts. They run below the surface of most days, coloring experience with a baseline of quiet inadequacy, shaping what the mind reaches for and what it assumes it cannot have. Acceptance here means something specific, looking at the self that is actually present, not the self that should be present, not the self of a more flattering past, not the self that would emerge if enough effort were applied, and allowing it to be sufficient to begin from. Self-forgiveness in this teaching is not the absolution of behavior. It is the release of the charge maintained against the self for what the self did in different conditions. The behavior can be acknowledged fully. Its effects can be seen clearly. The question of how to act differently going forward can be taken seriously. None of that requires continuing to carry the weight of what is already over. The word equanimity carries associations in English that can make it seem less accessible than it is. It is sometimes heard as a kind of elevated state that advanced practitioners inhabit, a serene remove from ordinary experience, a practiced coolness toward experience that no longer allows anything to land. That version is not only unavailable to most people, it would not be particularly useful if it were. A mind so stable that nothing affected it would also not be very present. Equanimity in this teaching is not the absence of being affected. It is the stability that allows full contact with experience without that contact becoming destabilizing. Equanimity is what gradually develops from a mind that practices acceptance consistently. It is not a destination that is reached once and held. It is a quality that deepens as the practice deepens. Things are still felt fully. Losses are real losses. Difficulties are genuinely difficult. But the mind has developed enough ground beneath itself that these arrivals do not sweep it entirely. It can be moved without being knocked over. It can be in contact with difficulty without contracting entirely around the difficulty. Ajahn Chah, a Thai forest monk who taught widely in the 20th century, described this with a plainness that is still useful. If you let go a little, you will have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you will have a lot of peace. If you let go completely, you will have complete peace. This is not a teaching about detachment. Letting go, in this context, does not mean not caring. It means releasing the grip that turns caring into clinging. The parent who cares deeply for a child and lets the child live their own life. The person who works hard toward a goal and releases attachment to a specific outcome. The practitioner who feels the full weight of a difficult situation and does not add the argument with its existence to the weight. In each case, what is released is not the caring. What is released is the contraction, the holding on so tightly that the held thing cannot breathe, and neither can the one holding. The Ajahn Chah teaching points toward a practice that is not primarily done in formal meditation, though formal practice deepens it. It is done in the moments of ordinary life where the grip is most habitual and least examined. The meeting that has been cancelled for the third time, the relationship that is not developing in the direction hoped, the body that is not recovering at the speed expected, the work that is moving more slowly than it needs to. In each case, the first arrow is present, the actual difficulty of the situation, and alongside it, in most people's minds, is the resistance, the sustained background sense that things should be different, that this level of cooperation from reality should not be necessary, that whatever needs to be done to make this situation more comfortable should have happened by now. Acceptance does not ask for the loss of the wish that things were different. It asks for the release of the sustained argument with the fact that they currently are not. Between those two things is the difference between wanting and contracting. In ordinary practice, this is what acceptance looks like, not as a grand spiritual achievement, but as a small, repeatable adjustment available in most moments. Something arrives, a piece of news, a person's behavior, a development in your own body, a direction the work is not going. The first movement in the mind is to note the feeling tone, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. The second movement, where acceptance becomes relevant, is what the mind does after that noting. The accepting mind registers what is present and holds it without immediately adding the layer of resistance or insistence. This is the situation. These are the conditions. What is actually here? Not, this should not be here. Not, how quickly can I remove this? Not, what does this mean about me or about the future? Simply, what is actually here, right now, in these conditions? One sign that acceptance is genuinely developing, rather than being performed, is a particular quality of tiredness that disappears. The tiredness of the argument. Most people do not realize how much energy is consumed by the sustained insistence that circumstances should be different, by the monitoring, the resisting, the managing of expectations about conditions that are already present. When that argument relaxes, even briefly, something in the system rests that had not been resting. That orientation requires something from the mind that does not come automatically. It comes from practice, from repeated contact with the teaching on impermanence, not as an idea to hold, but as something to feel in the texture of experience, from the gradual recognition through repeated experience, not through reasoning alone, that the mind's argument with conditions costs more energy than the conditions themselves. From small, repeated experiences of allowing something difficult to be what it is, and discovering that being with it clearly is more workable than fighting it. Nakulapita went home from that conversation with Sariputta with something he had not arrived with. Not relief exactly. Something more reliable than relief, which depends on circumstances improving. A way of holding the difficulty of his situation that did not add the suffering of resisting the difficulty. His body was still what it was. The conditions had not changed at all. The mind relating to those conditions had. Acceptance, finally, is not the end of caring. It is the beginning of being able to act from a different place, from what is actually here rather than from the resistance to what is here. That action tends to be cleaner, less driven, more true, not because the situation has improved, because the mind engaging with it is no longer at war with it. The practice of acceptance is not a project that gets completed. It is a direction that the mind learns to move in, more readily over time, with less insistence on conditions, with greater capacity to be with what is present before deciding what to do about it. Like all the practices that have come before it in this teaching, it begins small and ordinary. The conversation accepted as it is rather than as it should be. The day accepted as it unfolds rather than as it was planned. The self accepted as it currently is, capable of more, genuinely working with what is available now. Accepting what you have done is one thing. Accepting what was done to you is another. He arrived in a rage, the kind that had been building on the way, the kind where you rehearse what you are going to say before you arrive, and the rehearsing makes the anger hotter, not cooler. His name was Akasaka. He was a Brahmin from a family that had recently lost several of its members to the Buddha's teaching. They had left the household life, joined the community, abandoned the social structures and religious traditions that Akasaka considered the proper shape of a life. He took this personally. He found it unforgivable, and he had come to say so directly, at volume, in public. The Buddha was seated with a group of people when Akasaka arrived. He did not wait for an opening. He began immediately. Insults, accusations, the specific kind of contempt that comes from someone who has been composing their grievance for long enough that it has become polished. The people around the Buddha would have recognized what was happening. Some of them would have shifted uncomfortably. The Buddha waited until Akasaka finished. Then he asked a question about food. When you have guests to your home, he said, do you prepare food for them? Yes, Akasaka said. Of course. And if the guests do not accept the food, who does the food belong to? There was a pause. Akasaka saw where it was going before the next sentence arrived. To me, he said, it would remain with me. The Buddha said, you have brought me something today. I do not accept it. The silence after that was the kind that happens when something that seemed certain suddenly becomes uncertain. Akasaka had come prepared to create a wound. He was leaving with his hands still full. What happened in Akasaka in that moment is not described in detail. The text moves quickly, but something shifted. You can tell because of what followed. Akasaka had come prepared for argument, for deflection, for the kind of careful reasoning that makes its recipients look defensive. He knew how to press forward when met with those. What he had no strategy for was the possibility that the thing he was delivering would simply not be received. He had come to create a wound. He was leaving with his hands still full. What happened next in the text is that Akasaka asked to hear more. He sat down. Something in the exchange had moved him. Not toward agreement, not toward admiration, but toward a question he had not had when he arrived. What kind of mind does not accept insults? What is actually happening in a person who can sit with that kind of fury being directed at them and simply let it pass? The Buddha told him, but the teaching he gave that day was not primarily about how to receive anger. It was about what anger cost the person carrying it. Most people, when they think about resentment, Think about it as a response to something that happened. An event produced a feeling. The feeling is justified. Carrying the feeling is the natural consequence of having been harmed. This framing locates the resentment in the past as an effect whose cause lies in what someone else did. The Buddha's teaching locates it differently. Resentment is not a response to the past. It is an action in the present. Every time the mind returns to the injury, replays the scene, rehearses the argument, maintains the charge against the person who caused the harm, that is a present tense action. That action has the quality of aversion at its root, and aversion-rooted action creates unwholesome karma, regardless of how legitimate the grievance behind it is. The legitimacy of the grievance is not the question. The question is, who is the karma landing on? The Dhammapada addresses this directly in verses that are among the oldest surviving articulations of what holding on to injury actually does. He abused me, he beat me, he defeated me, he robbed me. In those who harbor such thoughts, hatred will never cease. He abused me, he beat me, he defeated me, he robbed me. In those who do not harbor such thoughts, hatred will soon cease. The verses are structured deliberately. 4 times the harm is named. He abused me, he beat me, he defeated me, he robbed me. The repetition is not accidental. It is insisting that we look directly at what happened before the teaching begins. This is not a teaching for people who were not harmed. It is a teaching for people who were. The verses are often misread as asking people to pretend the harm did not happen. That is not what they say. The phrases are precise. He abused me. He beat me. He defeated me. He robbed me. Each line acknowledges that something real occurred. The teaching is not that the event was nothing. The teaching is about what happens in the mind that keeps returning to it. Harboring those thoughts is an activity. It requires ongoing mental labor. The person who revisits the injury is not passively carrying the past. They are actively generating present tense suffering from material the past provided. And the person at the center of that labor is not the one who caused the harm. It is the one doing the revisiting. This is what the food metaphor makes precise. Akasaka had prepared something and brought it a considerable distance. The preparation took effort. The journey took effort. The delivery took effort. And then the recipient did not take it. All of that accumulated energy had nowhere to go but back. Resentment works the same way. It is directed at someone, but what it costs is paid by the person directing it. The one who lies awake at 2 a.m. replaying the scene, adjusting the argument, delivering the response they should have delivered. That person is not tormenting the one who caused the harm. That person is tormenting themselves. The other party may be sleeping undisturbed. Now the question of what forgiveness actually is becomes sharper. It is not approval. Forgiving someone does not mean that what they did was acceptable. The harm was real. If the behavior was wrong, forgiving it does not make it right. The moral evaluation of the action and the decision about what to do with the charge in your own mind are 2 entirely separate things. One does not require the other. It is not reconciliation. Forgiveness is an internal act. It does not require contact with the person who caused the harm. It does not require their acknowledgement, their remorse, or their change. The relationship can remain exactly as severed as it needs to be. What changes is the quality of the mental formation you are maintaining in relation to it. It is not forgetting. The events that happened did happen. They may be worth remembering as information, as the basis for decisions about future contact, as part of an honest understanding of how things are. Forgiveness does not ask for the deletion of accurate memory. It asks for the release of the charge that keeps the memory hot. The charge is the thing. There is a physical quality to this that people sometimes notice before they name it. A tightening in the body when the person's name is mentioned. A change in the quality of attention when something associated with them appears. A slight bracing, as if for impact. That happens automatically and has been happening for so long it no longer registers as unusual. These are the signs of a charge that is being maintained. Not consciously, not deliberately, but maintained nonetheless, because the mind has learned to contract around this particular wound and has been contracting around it for long enough that the contraction has become the default position. The charge does not require active thought to persist. It runs on its own once established. What active thought does is supply the energy that keeps it running through the revisiting, through the rehearsed arguments, through the alternative versions of events where justice was delivered differently. Remove the revisiting, and the charge begins, gradually, to lose fuel. Forgiveness is the decision to stop feeding it, not to erase it, not to approve of what created it, to stop supplying the energy that keeps it alive. Before examining the cost, it is worth pausing on something the tradition acknowledges and does not attempt to argue away. The resentment is often accurate. The person did what they did. The evaluation that what they did was harmful, wrong, or a betrayal is often correct. The teaching does not ask for a revision of the moral evaluation. The harm was the harm. That is not in dispute. The cost of maintained resentment is rarely examined honestly because the resentment feels justified, and it may well be. The evaluation of what happened may be entirely accurate, but justified is not the same as costless. The fuel being burned in the maintenance of the charge is the fuel of present moment attention, present moment energy, present moment karma. All of that is being directed at a past event in a way that makes the past event more present in the mind than the actual present is. Metta practice, the cultivation of goodwill, is the specific tool the tradition offers for working with resentment toward another person. It is frequently misunderstood as requiring warmth or affection towards someone who caused harm. That misunderstanding makes it seem either saccharine or impossible, depending on the severity of the harm. Neither reading is accurate. The practice has a specific structure. It typically begins with directing goodwill toward oneself, not as a feel-good exercise, but as the establishment of a ground from which the rest of the practice can proceed. From there, it moves outward, toward people for whom goodwill is easy, then toward neutral people, then toward the difficult ones. The sequence matters. You do not start with the person who caused the most harm. You build the capacity first in easier territory. With difficult people, the phrases are often offered through gritted teeth, at least initially. The practitioner knows they do not feel what the phrases say. The point is not to manufacture the feeling. The The point is to keep directing the attention in a specific direction rather than the direction it has been going. The aversion does not disappear immediately, but each repetition is a small interruption of the habitual movement toward it. The traditional phrases, "May you be well," "May you be safe," "May you be at peace," are not expressions of how the practitioner feels. They are the direction the mind is being trained to move, not toward warmth, away from aversion. The distinction matters because it makes the practice available in situations where warmth is genuinely not present and may never be. Metta towards someone who harmed you is not the generation of warmth or affection. It is the deliberate cultivation of non-aversion, the replacement of the aversion-rooted formation with something rooted in goodwill. Not goodwill as a feeling that has to be manufactured, but goodwill as an orientation that says, "I am releasing the charge. I am no longer maintaining the combustion. Whatever happens to you is no longer something I am invested in directing." Self-forgiveness is the same practice directed inward, and it is in many ways the harder one. The resentment most people carry toward themselves has been maintained longer than most resentments toward others. It has more material to work with. It knows exactly which memories carry the most charge and can access them precisely when the mind is tired or exposed. And it disguises itself particularly well as accountability, as standards, as the reasonable refusal to let yourself off the hook for what you actually did. The distinction the practice asks for here is the same as the distinction it asks for in relation to others. The behavior can be acknowledged fully. Its consequences can be seen clearly. The commitment to act differently can be genuine and serious. None of that requires the ongoing charge. The charge is not accountability. It is punishment, self-directed, endlessly renewable, and fueled by the same aversion that any other resentment is fueled by. Akasaka asked what kind of mind does not accept insults. The answer the Buddha gave was not about advanced spiritual achievement. It was about a mind that has understood something precise about where things land when they are thrown. The insult was thrown. The Buddha watched it arrive, recognized it for what it was, and did not extend his hands. It returned. This is not suppression. The Buddha was not absorbing the anger and hiding its effect. He was not performing serenity while privately maintaining a charge. The teaching is not about managing reactions better. It is about understanding clearly enough what the arriving thing actually is, and where it actually goes if received, that receiving it becomes a choice rather than a reflex. One thing that makes forgiveness different from acceptance is that it tends to work more slowly. Accepting a difficult present condition can sometimes shift within a single moment of clear seeing. Forgiveness of a genuine harm takes longer, not because the practice is harder, but because the charge involved is usually older, more layered, more intertwined with the sense of self and what the harm says about it. That release is not a single moment. It is a practice, the same as every other practice described in these teachings. The charge returns. The mind goes back to the injury. The first thing is to notice it returning, not with judgment, but with the same quality of noticing that was described in relation to feeling tones. The resentment arises. This is unpleasant. The mind is moving toward aversion. Seen. And in the seeing, the feeding stops. Not permanently, not finally, but for this moment. The charge was running. The noticing interrupted it. That is the complete sequence. It requires no additional effort, no forcing of feeling, no performance of release. Just the noticing clearly enough that the automaticity of the charge is briefly visible as automaticity, and then again in the next moment when it returns. There is a specific moment in the practice that practitioners sometimes describe not as a dramatic release, but as a quiet noticing. The charge was present. Then, for a moment, it was not. The memory of the harm was there, but the firing around it was absent. The event was the same event, but the person relating to it had, for that moment, stopped maintaining the formation that made every contact with it painful. That moment is available more often than most people realize. Not permanently, not finally, but more often. The chain has two ends. One is attached to what happened. The other is attached to whoever is still carrying it. Forgiveness does not change what happened. Nothing does. It changes who is still attached to it, and at what cost. Releasing what happened is one practice. Living what is here is another. The cloth was white when the Buddha handed it to him. By the end of the first day, it was grey. His name was Kulapanthaka. He had been in the community for 4 months and could not memorize a single verse. Not one. His brother, also a monk, a capable one, had tried to teach him and eventually given up. The conclusion was stated plainly. You are not suited for this. Go back. Chulapanthaka was sitting by the road, crying, when the Buddha found him. He was not crying because he wanted to leave. He was crying because he had wanted to stay and had been told he could not. The community was the only life that had ever made sense to him. The teachings, even the ones he could not memorize, had pointed at something real, and now the person whose opinion carried the most weight in his world, his own brother, who had succeeded where he had failed, had made a practical assessment and delivered it without cruelty and without mercy. The words were accurate. He had failed at the one thing required of him. There was no argument to make. The Buddha did not offer reassurance. He did not argue with the brother's assessment or tell Kulapanthaka he was wrong about himself. He gave him a clean white cloth and an instruction so simple it seemed like nothing. Sit here. Hold this. Repeat these 2 words. Removing dust. Removing dust. That was it. No teaching. No explanation. Just the cloth, the hands, the words. Kulapanthaka sat. He held the cloth. He said the words and moved the cloth through his hands. Hour after hour, the cloth grew grey. He noticed it growing grey. And at some point, not through reasoning but through the simple act of looking at what was in his hands, he saw something he had not expected to see. The cloth had been clean. He had seen it clean. Now it was dirty. The dirt was not coming from the floor or the air. It was coming from his hands. He had understood the instruction as being about external dust, but the dust coming off his hands was not that kind of dust. It was the residue of what the mind carries when it moves through the world, reacting to everything it meets, reaching, pushing away, mistaking the surface of things for what they are. That was the dust, and it was leaving his hands slowly through the act of attending completely to one simple thing. The teaching did not need to be understood before the practice worked. Understanding came through the practice, not before it. This is what Kulapanthaka's brother had missed. He had been measuring his brother's capacity by the ability to hold words. The capacity that mattered was different, the ability to be fully here with what was actually happening without the mind running ahead of itself into analysis or falling behind into self-judgment. Kulapanthaka had that capacity. He simply had not known it was the one required. He did not become awake that day through knowledge. He had no new knowledge. He became awake through the quality of attention he brought to a cloth in his hands, full, uninterrupted, present to exactly what was happening and nothing else. Now all of it comes back to ground. The teaching on intention showed that karma is the quality of mind behind the action, not the action itself. The three roots showed what that quality is made of: craving, aversion, confusion, and what their opposites look like when they run instead. The teaching on Sitana showed that intention is not only the deliberate choice, but the entire orientation of the mind in the moment, including orientations it is not aware of. The two arrows showed that the first arrow, unavoidable difficulty, does not determine suffering. The second arrow does, and the second arrow is optional. The feeling tone showed the mechanism, the precise point in the chain where the automatic response begins and where it can be interrupted. Acceptance showed what the mind needs to stay with what is present without fighting it. Forgiveness showed what happens when the fight is with a person, a specific act, a charge maintained long past the original event. Wholesome karma is not a separate practice. It is not something you do in addition to living your life. It is the quality of mind you bring to what you are already doing, the meeting you are already in, the task already in front of you, the conversation already happening, the difficulty already present. Most people, when they think about improving the quality of their actions, think about the significant ones, the important decision, the difficult conversation they have been avoiding, the moment of genuine ethical weight where the right choice is not obvious. These moments matter, but they represent a fraction of the karma created in any given day. The larger portion is created in moments that do not feel significant at all. The quality of attention brought to a task when no one is watching. The words used to a person who has no power to reward or punish the speaker. The thought held about someone who is not present. The reaction to a small inconvenience that nobody will remember. This is where the wholesome mind is built, or not built, across the ordinary texture of a life. The difference between wholesome and unwholesome karma in any given moment is not what is being done. It is what the mind doing it is rooted in. Whether craving is running the action, the need for a particular result, the management of how you appear, the subtle reaching for something that is not yet here. whether aversion is running it, the pushing away of difficulty, the avoidance of discomfort, the silent refusal of what is present, whether confusion is running it, the habit of seeing what conditioning expects rather than what is actually there. When those three roots are not driving the action, something else becomes available, not a special state. The mind that is simply here, clear, doing what it is doing because it is the right thing to do, not because of what it produces, not because of how it will be seen, not because of what it avoids. This is the most important thing in this entire teaching, and it is easy to miss because it sounds too simple. The wholesome mind is not a different mind. It is this mind, the one already here, already experiencing whatever is happening right now, operating from a different route. The question is not, how do I become a better person? The question is, what is running this moment? Is it craving, moving towards something that is not yet here? Is it aversion, pushing away what is? Is it confusion, mistaking the story for the situation? Those three questions, asked honestly in an ordinary moment, are the whole of the practice. Mindfulness is the practice that makes this possible with increasing consistency, not the version that has been most widely distributed, the stress reduction version, the 10 minutes of calm before the day begins. The precise version, the kind the Satipatthana Sutta describes. Knowing, clearly and directly, what is present in the mind right now. When craving is present, knowing that craving is present, not labeling it from a distance, but recognizing it from inside. When aversion is present, knowing that aversion is present. When clarity is present, knowing that clarity is present. When a familiar story is assembling itself around an experience, catching it in the assembling rather than after it has completed. This precision changes what the mind can do with what arises. A craving that is not seen becomes an action. A craving that is seen clearly is a craving, something that arose, something being noticed, something that does not have to complete its trajectory automatically. The seeing is not the suppression. The craving is allowed to be fully present. What the seeing does is break the automaticity. The gap between arising and response widens slightly. Not always enough, but sometimes enough. The Satipatthana Sutta instructs the practitioner to be present in the body, in sensation, in mental states, and in the nature of experience as it arises and passes. Not to think about these things, to know them directly as they are happening. Walking, knowing you are walking. The irritation arising in a conversation, knowing it is arising before it has fully shaped what comes out of your mouth. There is a quality that develops in a mind that practices this consistently. The tradition describes it through 7 factors, not as stages to achieve, but as qualities that appear and reinforce each other when practice is genuinely happening. The first is the mindfulness itself, the clear knowing, not knowing about, knowing directly, right now, what is present. From that comes investigation. The mind that is genuinely paying attention naturally sees more clearly the structure of what it is attending to, not through analysis, through direct observation of what arises and passes. From investigation comes energy, not forced effort, but the quality of genuine engagement. A mind actually paying attention is not bored or listless. It is awake to what is here. It does not need to be persuaded to continue. What it is doing is genuinely interesting because it is real. From that engagement comes a quiet quality of aliveness, more like being genuinely present than like excitement. From that quality comes tranquility, the settling that happens when the energy of practice is no longer forced. From tranquility comes concentration, the capacity to stay with what is actually here without constant interruption. And from concentration comes equanimity, the stability that allows full contact with experience without being swept by it. The capacity to be fully in what is happening while remaining, somehow, the one it is happening to. These 7 qualities are not a checklist. They are a description of what a mind that is genuinely practicing looks like from the inside. Compassion is what emerges from this quality of seeing. The tradition presents it as a natural result of clear seeing, not as a separate practice to be added on. When the mind sees clearly how suffering arises, not as an abstract principle but as something visible in direct experience, the response to seeing the same mechanism in another person is not judgment. It is recognition. That person is running what you have run. They are caught in what has caught you. This is why the tradition does not teach compassion as an ethical obligation. It does not say, try harder to care about people. It teaches clear seeing. The compassion follows from the seeing, not from the effort to feel it. In practice, this can arrive in small moments. The person in the meeting who is difficult, whose defensiveness or dismissiveness is familiar because you have seen the same thing operating in yourself under different conditions. The recognition is not warm. It is not affectionate. It is simply accurate. That person is in pain. The behavior is pain protecting itself. You have been in pain. You have protected it the same way. The contempt that would have been automatic gives way to something quieter. Not agreement, not approval, just the clear seeing of what is actually happening. In an ordinary day, all of this looks quieter than it sounds. It looks like noticing the urge to check the phone before picking it up. It looks like sitting with an uncomfortable silence in a conversation instead of filling it. It looks like the meeting where something is said that stings, and the sting is felt fully and named. This is unpleasant. This is aversion beginning, before the response that protects against it has formed. It looks like waking from an automatic response, not before it happens, but during it, or just after, with enough presence to see what just ran. It looks like catching yourself building a case against someone, gathering evidence for a verdict already reached, and noticing the construction while it is happening. None of these require a particular state. They require noticing. These are not moments of spiritual achievement. They are the actual texture of the practice. Most of them happen privately, invisibly, in the middle of situations that would look completely ordinary to anyone watching. This is what makes the practice democratic in a way that few practices are. It does not require intelligence. Kulapanthaka could not memorize a verse. It does not require particular circumstances. The cloth was a piece of ordinary fabric. It does not require a teacher present or a community around you or the right mental state before you begin. It requires only that you attend fully to what is actually in your hands right now. Wholesome karma does not accumulate like money in an account. It is not stored and retrieved. It is created in real time, in the moments where the mind meets what is present and responds from clarity rather than from conditioning. That moment is available right now, and right now, and again right now, not as a destination. As this, whatever is here, seen clearly, responded to from what is actually present rather than from what conditioning says should be present. Kulapanthaka's cloth was ordinary. The instruction was simple. The dust it removed was the accumulated residue of every moment the mind had moved through experience without fully arriving. Every time it reached before it looked, every time it pushed away before it understood, every time it ran a story in place of direct contact. The cloth received all of that, slowly and incompletely, in the way practice actually works rather than the way we imagine it should. Not through sudden transformation, through the ordinary accumulation of moments of genuine attention, each one small, each one adding to a quality of mind that shows itself not in the significant moments, but in the texture of the ordinary ones. The wholesome mind is not somewhere ahead of you. It is present in every moment you choose to look clearly at what is in your hands rather than at what you wish were there, or what you are afraid might arrive, or what happened the last time you held something like this. That moment is available right now. The quality of attention he brought to the cloth was the practice. That quality is available to anyone, in any moment, with whatever is already in their hands. Think of the moment this video started with. Something not going as planned. A situation that arrived without warning and demanded something from the mind that was not ready for it. That moment will come again. Not the same situation, but the same kind of moment. The phone call that changes the afternoon. The conversation that does not go the way you expected. The difficulty arriving in ordinary clothing, the way it always does. The mind that has practiced meets that moment differently, not because it has become a different mind, because it has learned to see what is running it. Whether craving is reaching before the situation is even understood, whether aversion is already moving away before the full weight of what has arrived is felt, whether the old story is assembling so automatically that it completes before any choice was possible. Seen clearly, not always, not perfectly, but more often over time, those three roots begin to lose their grip on the next moment. Not through force, through the clarity that the practice builds in ordinary conditions, in ordinary moments, in the actual texture of a life. This is what all of it was pointing at, not a state to arrive at. The mind that is always already here, beneath the reaching and the pushing, beneath the old patterns running themselves. You are not someone karma is happening to. You are the mind that was always here, already shaping what comes next. Even now,